Alec Baldwin, A Very Angry Narcissist, Part 3. The Guardian newspaper reported as follows in 2011. Alec Baldwin says he was kicked off a plane on Tuesday at Los Angeles International Airport after having words with a flight attendant over an addicting word game he was playing on his cell phone. The 30 Rock actor was asked to get off a New York City-bound flight for playing words with friends while the plane idled at a gate, said Baldwin's spokesman, Matthew Hiltzik. He loves words with friends so much that he was willing to leave a plane for it, said Hiltzik, who added that Baldwin boarded another American Airlines flight to New York. Well, I suspect it's not a case that he was willing to leave a plane for it because he was asked to get off. And of course, the fact that the relevant airline regulations state that electronic devices have to be switched off demonstrates a sense of entitlement that he would not switch his device off, and that he had no boundary recognition by continuing to want to play it, and had no accountability for his behaviours because he refused to do what he was asked to do and instead asserted control by walking off the plane. The Guardian article continues, Baldwin, a prolific Twitter user, took to the social media site to vent, saying, "A flight attendant on American reamed me out for playing words with friends while we sat at the gate not moving," smearing indirect assertion of control. The article explains it wasn't clear if passengers had been asked to turn off their cell phones, which is typical before a flight backs away from the terminal. American Airlines spokesman Ed Martell declined to comment, citing customer privacy concerns. Airport Police Sergeant Belinda Nettles said officers didn't respond to the incident. Baldwin tweeted that it would be his last flight with American, smearing assertion of control by withdrawal, threat, despite the fact that the airline showed 30 Rock for in-flight entertainment. He mocked American Airlines flight attendants on Twitter, insult, saying the airline is where Catholic schoolgirl gym teachers from the 1950s find jobs as flight attendants. Insult, lack of emotional empathy, sense of entitlement. There then followed after the incident a supposed apology from Mr. Baldwin, as reported by TMZ. Alec Baldwin just went off about American Airlines, its employees post 9/11 travel, and the entire airline industry, and best of all, this rant came wrapped in an apology. In his letter, just published on HuffingtonPost.com, Baldwin begins by apologising to passengers on yesterday's flight, saying, "It was never my intention to inconvenience anyone with my issue with a certain flight attendant." He claims the woman singled him out to make some example of me. Pity play. Blame shifting. Baldwin continues, "It's no secret that the level of service on US carriers has deteriorated to a point that would make Howard Hughes red-faced. Filthy planes, barely edible meals, cuts in jet service to less travelled locations." I'm not quite sure what all of that has to do with an apology. And of course, typical of the behaviour of the narcissist, it is insulting by deflecting and making the issue about somebody else rather than his own behaviour. He also claims the industry used 9/11 as an excuse to make the air travel experience as inelegant as possible. Delusion. Insult. Absence of emotional empathy. In his closing shot, Baldwin says many flight attendants walk the aisles of an airplane with a whistle round their neck and a clipboard in their hands and make air travel a Greyhound bus experience. Insult. Triangulation. Smearing. That is nowhere near an apology. He starts off by saying that it wasn't his intention to inconvenience anybody, and then just goes into a rant about the behaviours, as he sees it, of the relevant airline. Not an apology in any shape or form. We now go to the 19th of June 2012, where there's a media confrontation. TMZ reports, "Things got physical between Alec Baldwin and a New York Daily News photographer today, as Alec was leaving a New York courthouse with his fiancée, Hilaria Thomas. According to the New York Daily News, Baldwin had just obtained a marriage license when he got into it with one of their staff photographers, Marcus Santos. Santos told the paper Baldwin was screaming for him and another Daily News photographer to back up. Heated fury, shouting, and they obliged, but Baldwin kept coming. Sense of entitlement, need to assert control. He comes after me, starts shoving and punching me, one time right in the chin. Physical violence. But sources connected with Alec tell TMZ the photographer almost hit him with the camera, and while Alec pushed him away, he did not punch him. Deflection, rejection of accountability. Moments after the altercation, Alec tweeted, "A photographer almost hit me in the face with his camera this morning. Hashtag, all paparazzi should be waterboarded." Insult, heated fury. During the altercation, the second NY Daily News photographer snapped a shot of Alec with his arms extended and Santos falling back. Now, of course, we all know that the paparazzi get in people's faces and often behave in a completely odious fashion, but the simplest way to deal with them is to ignore them. But of course, the presence of the paparazzi is viewed as intrusive and is unconsciously interpreted as a threat to control. Hence, the explosive response of Mr. Baldwin, who repeatedly responds with heated fury in order to assert control. That took place on the 19th of June 2012. Mere days later, on the 29th of June 2012, it was reported that Alec Baldwin got physical with another photographer in New York City, verbally blasting the guy, verbal violence, heated fury, in the middle of the street, squeezing his arm, physical violence, and ordering him to scram. It's unclear what touched off the aggressive confrontation, but we do know the Paps have been following Alec all over the place since the infamous shoving incident at the courthouse last week. It seems Alec finally had enough. This time, Alec, clutching a pink stuffed animal, approached one of the photographers who was hanging out in front of his apartment building and lashed out, "I want you to shut the fuck up. Leave my neighbour alone. Get out of here." Verbal violence, ordering around, heated fury. At one point at the beginning of the confrontation, it sounds like Alec says to the photographer, "I know you got raped by a priest or something." Insult, absence of emotional empathy. Then in an effort to assert his dominance, Alec got right in the Pap's face and in a menacing tone said, "You little girl." The Pap tried to explain himself, but Alec wasn't having it, and walked back into his building, assertion of control through withdrawal. Even though he might have been baited, the confrontation may not have been the smartest move for Alec, since the New York Police Department is still investigating the actor for assault over the court incident. We then have another media confrontation, this time on the 18th of February 2013. Alec Baldwin was involved in another confrontation with the media after he allegedly threatened to choke a reporter to death and hurled a racial slur at a photographer. Threat, insult, absence of emotional empathy, need to assert control. Both Baldwin and the photographer of the New York Post, G.N. Miller, filed harassment claims against one another following the run-in. According to the Post, the reporter, Tara Palmieri, approached Baldwin while he was walking his dogs to ask him about a recent lawsuit against his wife Hilaria. The reporter says Baldwin responded by grabbing her by the arm, physical violence, and saying, I want you to choke to death." Insult, threat. The Post also says Palmieri played an audio recording of the threat to police. Baldwin then turned the Post photographer, who they say is black and a retired detective with the NYPD's Organised Crime Control Bureau, and allegedly called him a coon, crackhead and drug dealer. Insult, racial insult, assertion of control, absence of emotional empathy, sense of entitlement. The Post says Baldwin posted several tweets about the incident, one of which said, "Thank you to NYPD officers who came to my home today so that I could file a formal complaint against NY Post photographer who assaulted me." On the evidence, that suggests that that's a lie, revision of history. The tweets have been deleted. And yet another confrontation takes place. 28th of June 2013, TMZ reports. Alec Baldwin, who puts Paula Dean to shame in the bigotry department, again showed his true colours with a hate-filled tirade that targeted gays. A British reporter wrote a story that Baldwin's wife was tweeting recipes and other things during James Gandolfini's funeral. That's another matter for discussion about Hilaria on another occasion. The actor went nuts on Twitter, claiming the story was false. Nothing wrong with that. But then Baldwin played his go-to homophobic card. He's done it before, tweeting that the reporter was a toxic little queen. Indirect control by insult and smearing. Baldwin continued, "If put my foot up your fucking ass, George Stark, but I'm sure you dig it too much." Insult. Baldwin then called the reporter a fucking little bitch several times, and then just plain threatened, "I'm gonna fuck you up." Again, the exhibition of heated fury, threat, no facade in operation, direct assertion of control. This evidences repeated instances of Wherever there is a threat that's perceived by him to his control, and that is taking place in the unconscious, Mr. Baldwin explodes. He explodes with heated fury because it drives him to assert control by physical violence, verbal insult, racial and homophobic slurs. These are rudimentary and based forms of manipulations. There's no panache or style with regard to these, no finesse, and they are at the bottom rung of the types of manipulation that a narcissist would utilise, but nevertheless are indicators in themselves. Join me in part 4 as the heat ramps up with regard to Mr. Baldwin's behaviour and yet more indicators come his way.